Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com. Muscle cramps can be excruciating and hard to overcome. There are no FDA-approved treatments. What about home remedies? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
When we talk about home remedies, some people tell us they don't care how it works as long as it does the job. Skeptics dismiss non-drug remedies as old wives' tales. They require an explanation of the mechanism of action. Without scientific plausibility, they can't imagine that a home remedy could be helpful.
What happens when the science changes? New research on muscle cramps suggests that there is a scientific reason for mustard or pickle juice as a muscle cramp remedy.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, we answer your questions about home remedies.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, physical exertion, anger, or emotional distress are linked to heart attacks. The InterHeart study looked at the circumstances in the hour before an initial heart attack. The investigators reviewed data on 12,461 heart attacks in 52 countries. They found that sudden intense physical activity, such as shoveling snow or running to catch a plane, doubled the risk of a heart attack in the next hour. So did anger or other extreme emotions. The combination of anger and exertion tripled the likelihood of an initial myocardial infarction. The authors suggest that doctors should encourage patients to avoid emotional upset, which can trigger adrenaline and other stress responses. This increases heart rate and blood pressure and the possibility of a heart attack.
People who take calcium supplements are more likely to end up with calcium in their arteries. More than 5,000 people between 45 and 84 years of age participated in the multi-ethnic study of atherosclerosis for 10 years. They filled out questionnaires about dietary habits and supplement use and went through coronary artery scans to detect calcification. About half of them had a second scan at the end of the study. The researchers found that those who got the most calcium had the cleanest arteries, unless their calcium was coming from supplements. In that case, they had the most calcification. When coronary arteries become calcified, there's an increased risk for heart disease. This study confirms the results of other research implicating calcium supplements in the development of hardened arteries.
Many people believe that drinking 8-ounce glasses of water a day is essential for good health. Australian researchers have conducted sophisticated studies and conclude that overdrinking may actually be hazardous to people's health. The study demonstrated that there's a natural reluctance to swallow when people consume excess liquid. The body has a very carefully regulated system for adjusting fluid intake. The investigators used functional MRI imaging of the brain getting ready to swallow water under two different conditions. In one, the subjects had exercised and were thirsty. In the second, they had already drunk ample water and were asked to drink more. Subjects rated the difficulty of swallowing 3 times higher when they were not thirsty. The brain scans showed excess activity in the prefrontal cortex in this situation. In other words, the brain was attempting to bypass inhibition of the swallowing reflex. The authors note that overdrinking can lead to hyponatremia, a condition in which too little sodium is circulating throughout the body. This can become a life-threatening situation. They note that thirst is usually the best guide for how much water to drink. An exception is in the elderly, who may need to monitor fluid intake because thirst is less efficient and dehydration can lead to serious complications.
Scientists have known for years that consuming oats can lower cholesterol. In fact, the first study showing that oat bread instead of white bread reduced LDL cholesterol was published in 1963. A new meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials shows that the beta-glucan in oat fiber actually lowers 3 different markers of blood fats. In addition to LDL cholesterol, beta-glucan consumption diminished levels of non-HDL cholesterol and apolipoprotein B. Elevated levels of these fats are particularly dangerous for people with type 2 diabetes or metabolic syndrome.
A new study shows that antibiotics taken by one hospital patient can affect the next person to use that hospital bed, even if the second individual isn't being treated with antibiotics. The research reviewed records on more than 100,000 pairs of patients between 2010 and 2015. There were 4 hospitals participating in the study. More than 500 people who were the second patient in the pair developed a C. diff infection. Clostridium difficile can cause serious, hard-to-treat diarrhea. Overall, that rate is low, less than 1% of the whole group, but the relative risk was 22% higher if the previous bed occupant had received antibiotics. The conclusion: use antibiotics only when they are truly necessary. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon. I'm a medical anthropologist.
And I'm Joe Graydon. I'm a pharmacologist. Home remedies are rarely tested in a scientific manner. That's why skeptics frequently attribute any purported benefits to a placebo effect. But what if there were a scientific explanation for an unorthodox remedy?
Many people have told us that they can stop muscle cramps and stop them fast by swallowing a teaspoonful of yellow mustard or an ounce or 2 of pickle juice. Because the mechanism of action isn't obvious, many people don't believe this could possibly work. But we recently came across an account of 2 neurobiologists who have come up with a very plausible hypothesis, as well as a new product.
We were so fascinated by the story that we contacted one of the scientists. Dr. Bruce Bean is professor of neurobiology at Harvard Medical School. He and his colleague, Nobel Prize winner Rod McKinnon, became curious about what causes muscle cramps. Years of research yielded a surprising and satisfying explanation.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Bean.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Terry.
And we're delighted to have you on the show. You know, I guess I'd like to ask you first about your excursion with Dr. Rod McKinnon off the coast of Cape Cod. What were you guys doing?
Well, we were sea kayaking, and that's how we got interested in cramps, because although both of us are neurophysiologists who work on the physiology of nerve and muscle, we had never really thought about cramps before. And we are friends, and we started sea kayaking a lot together. And it was one day in October when we were taking a particularly long trip on kind of a cold day from Chatham on Cape Cod to Monomoy Island. And we were about 15 miles away from where we'd started, and it was a fairly rough day. And we had lunch, and both of us simultaneously got cramps in our forearms when we were paddling back. And it was actually, quite disturbing for a while, because we were out in big seas and having trouble paddling. That got us very interested in why we were cramping, despite having drunk a lot of sports beverage during the trip and at lunch. And then we started learning about muscle cramping, reading about it, and ultimately led us to develop a new treatment for it.
Well, before we get into the new treatment, I have to tell you, I would have been petrified. I mean, totally scared, because you were way out in the ocean.
It was frightening, because there were big swells. We were, on a day where there wasn't any boat traffic out there. We really were quite isolated, and it was the first time for both of us. I remember, I felt my forearms stiffening up, so I was having trouble paddling, and I called over to Rod and said, Rod, I'm having trouble paddling. And he said, I am too. My arms are cramping. And so we actually were able to get our kayaks together. We had some more stability, and kind of gradually worked out that even though it took quite a while for the cramps to resolve, we were able to sort of paddle with our arms straight.
Wow, that's amazing.
It certainly got our attention, and, it made it very clear that it wasn't lack of electrolytes or hydration, because we both had been drinking electrolyte, solution a lot on that trip.
Well, that is was the leading hypothesis for why muscles cramp, that it's either dehydration or an electrolyte imbalance. So how long after this frightening experience did it take before you started actually thinking about how do nerves and muscles interact to do this thing?
Well, it was gradual. We started reading a lot of the scientific literature, and what we discovered very quickly was that what we had learned in graduate school and medical school, which was that cramping was due to dehydration or lack of electrolytes. Athletic trainers often say it's from a decrease in potassium concentration or a buildup of lactic acid was another theory. And we discovered that in research that people were doing, that all of these had been discredited, and people had shown that, in fact, most cramping during particularly athletics, where it's been studied the most, can occur even in the absence of dehydration, even without changes in electrolytes. There's a sports physician named Martin Schwellnus, a sports exercise physiologist in South Africa, who's actually studied this and found that, for example, in marathon runners who cramp, that there was no correlation with dehydration, no correlation with changes in electrolytes, and in fact the only correlation he found, and these were elite marathon runners, was that the people who had the best times and actually finished the best were the most likely to cramp. So it also wasn't lack of training, which is something else that you sometimes hear from trainers.
Well, what has always fascinated me is that a lot of times people, especially older people, but this can happen to almost anyone, will wake up in the middle of the night with what's called a Charlie horse, just a really painful leg cramp, just out of the blue. They weren't exercising because they were sleeping, and there was no reason for them to be dehydrated or, have some sort of weird electrolyte imbalance. And it's like, well, why did that happen?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a mystery. We became very aware of that as we got interested in cramping and began to work on it. We were doing experiments on ourselves and sort of, telling our friends and family about it. And we became aware of how many people get night cramping. It's amazing. And, it gets more prevalent as people get older, but there are many people, in their 30s, 40s who get just spontaneous night cramping. And just as you say, sometimes if people exercise, they say that they're more susceptible to it. But many people get it just completely spontaneously, and exactly as you say, it's very clearly not correlated with or caused by dehydration or electrolyte changes there.
Now, Dr. Bean, if it isn't caused by dehydration or electrolyte changes, and we believe you, it isn't, what does cause muscle cramps?
Well, the hypothesis is, and I think, the evidence is all consistent with this, is that it's really hyperexcitability of the neurons that control the muscle, so that it's not something happening in the muscle itself, but it's excessive firing of the motor neurons in the spinal cord, which control the muscle contraction. And there's no animal model of muscle cramping, which is one of the reasons that we know so little about it scientifically. But there are some studies that have been done in spasms, which are probably closely related. And what you see in those studies is that the cramping is really caused by firing of the motor neuron in an excessive way. It's almost like a little mini seizure of the motor neuron and the circuits that control it.
So, Dr. Bean, it's my understanding that you and your Nobel Prize-winning colleague, Dr. McKinnon, actually used electrical stimulation to induce cramping. That sounds painful.
Well, it could be, yes. So we realized as we got interested in this that if we were going to try to work on new treatments, that we could actually do experiments on ourselves. And, if you induce cramping with exercise, it takes a lot of work to do it. It's a little bit hard to control well. And what we realized from reading the literature in exercise physiology was that people had discovered that if you stimulate a muscle repetitively, and you can do this just using external electrodes, just little patch electrodes that you can put on yourself. These are designed, for therapy often to stimulate either nerves or muscle. And if you stimulate the nerve ending near the muscle in this way, just moderately, about 10 times a second or 15 times a second, you can, in many cases, very reliably put the muscle into cramp. And so we began testing that on ourselves. It worked beautifully. And then that gave us a very reproducible way of doing self-experimentation to start experimenting with various treatments. It was a lot of fun. In the beginning, we started doing it on our calf muscles. And what we discovered there, which people who get Charlie horses in their calf muscles, told us was not surprising, that can be very painful. When your calf muscle goes into a full-blown cramp, it's extremely painful. So later we began working on the muscles of our big toes, which also can be induced to cramp, but is a much less painful experience.
I'm pretty sure someone has done some research with that. There were a bunch of young men who were bicycling in research that was undertaken on muscle cramps in Utah not too long ago, maybe within the past 10 years. And they stimulated the big toe to see how well pickle juice would work. But you didn't work on pickle juice. What experiments did you do?
Well, what we came up with, and it was actually partly inspired by the work on pickle juice, which was done by an exercise physiologist named Kevin Miller, who found in doing tests on people inducing cramping in their big toe that pickle juice would resolve the cramping in less than a minute, which really intrigued us because that's very clearly not being mediated by a change in electrolytes. It's much too fast for that. He didn't really know how it worked. And we came up with the hypothesis that maybe the active ingredient in pickle juice was the acetic acid. And what we realized was that acetic acid is very effective at stimulating certain receptors in neurons, which are found in the mouth and the esophagus and the stomach. These receptors are called trip channels. Acetic acid activates these. It's not terribly effective, and it's not terribly long-lasting because it gets buffered. It's essentially, the pH can be buffered quite quickly in the tissue. But we realized if that's the way it's working, that there are a variety of other organic, natural molecules that can do the same thing but much more effectively. And so that's when we started experimenting with a whole variety of different activators of trip channels from natural sources.
You're listening to Dr. Bruce Bean, the Robert Winthrop Professor of Neurobiology at Harvard Medical School. In a few minutes, we'll learn more about how Dr. Bean and his buddy Dr. McKinnon came up with their anti-cramping concoction.
After the break, we'll find out how Dr. Bean tested different flavors for their activity on trip channels.
Hot peppers, mustard, ginger, and many other spicy substances all seem to have an effect.
And we'll take your calls. Have you ever used mustard or pickle juice for leg cramps? Our lines are open at 888-472-3366. If our lines are full, you can send an email at radio@peoplespharmacy.com or via Twitter. We're at People's Pharmacy. Give us a call, 888-472-3366.
You're listening to the People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you like the information you hear when you listen to the People's Pharmacy, you may also enjoy our book published by National Geographic. It's the People's Pharmacy Quick and Handy Home Remedies, available online at peoplespharmacy.com or at your favorite bookstore.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that moisturize deeply to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. The number is 800-345 888-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
And if you would like to purchase a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. It's show number 1054. You can also find it at our website, peoplespharmacy.com.
Today we're bringing you up to date on the stories behind the health headlines, and we're talking about unusual home remedies. We invite you to join the conversation. Have you ever used mustard to stop a muscle cramp or treat a burn? What about soap under the bottom sheet to prevent leg cramps? Our lines are open at 888-472-3366. If they're full, you can send us an email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com, or reach us via Twitter. We're at People's Pharmacy. Again, to join the conversation, the number is 888-472-3366.
We're talking with Dr. Bruce Beam. He's professor of neurobiology at Harvard Medical School, and he's part of the dynamic duo that came up with a brilliant scientific explanation for muscle cramps and a way to treat them. His colleague, Dr. Rod McKinnon, is also a neuroscientist who just happens to be a Nobel Prize winner.
Dr. Bean, you were sharing with us the pickle juice concept, the acetic acid, but that led you to a whole other range of experiments, and I'm kind of curious, what did you all start testing, and what did you discover?
Well, we started testing actually a whole variety of agents from natural products that could activate these trip channels. There's lots of them, and some of them are, for example, capsaicin, which is in hot pepper and paprika. There are agents in gingerols, and a variety of other agents in ginger, a variety of agents in mustard oil, for example, in hot radishes, in wasabi. Lots of natural plants that have activators of these. And so we began experimenting with mixtures of these to try to find something that was maximally effective. The big problem we had in doing that was trying to find something that was palatable. And, in some of the early mixtures, once we found that they were effective on ourselves, we started giving them to our friends and family who volunteered to have their big toe cramped. And
some people probably said, I can't stand that. It's much too hot. If you're putting in gingerol and something from wasabi and some capsaicin, which is the hot stuff from chili peppers, this is going to be real hot stuff.
Exactly. And a lot of it was actually just very difficult to get down for a lot of people. And it took quite a while to come up with a combination of agents that was effective but also palatable. And in fact, the final product, which is now in the market, called Hot Shot, I think the team did an incredible job of maintaining the efficacy but also having something that, to me, actually tastes very good. And I think most people find it, fine to drink. And I'd say about a third of the people actually kind of like it. But it was not easy to do, and it took a lot of experimentation with, a lot of possibilities.
Well, I'd like to read you an email that came in over the transom from somebody named Joe. He wrote, "Have you tried Hot Shot for cramps? It was developed by MIT neuroscientists." Sorry, Dr. Bean, evidently someone got it a little confused.
Just a mile away.
It worked on me and everyone I've introduced it to. Olympians use it, and every sports team should have it on hand. So Joe sounds pretty excited about your product.
Oh, that's great to hear. We're actually been very, very pleased by the feedback from athletes. And, we originally designed it for athletes. I mean, that's kind of how we were thinking of it. That's how we sort of got into it ourselves. And many of the people we talked to originally were bicycle racers and triathletes. My sister's a triathlete, and Rod McKinnon's brother, Don, is a very serious amateur triathlete. But we've also become aware, actually, that a lot of people, are using it, not just for athletics, but for cramps that come about in any way. And the feedback has been great. In fact, I think right now well over half of the NFL teams have ordered it and are using it. And, we're getting great feedback from elite athletes, but also, people who are sort of weekend warriors who are using it.
Now, Dr. Bean, I have to tell you, as a pharmacologist, we were very much aware of the fact that people were sharing with us their home remedies for cramps. People who were long-distance bicyclists or people who were just armchair football watchers and got cramps in the middle of the night were telling us that pickle juice worked, that if they swallowed a tablespoon of yellow mustard, that worked in about 2 minutes. And we tried it ourselves, and yes, we knew it worked. But there were a lot of health professionals who just laughed. I mean, they just said, this is a placebo. It's like getting up and walking to the refrigerator to get the yellow mustard or the pickle juice. That's what's doing it. It couldn't possibly work. And as a pharmacologist, I was going, I can't imagine absorbing the mustard or the pickle juice ingredients quickly enough to circulate through your body to end the cramp. It didn't make any sense logically until I read about your research. And all of a sudden it was like, wow, that's an alternate universe explanation. So can you tell us how it is that Hot Shot or any of these home remedies is actually working to stimulate those channels in the mouth, the throat, and the stomach to override the nerve stimulation that's causing the cramp?
Well, the hypothesis we have, and it really is a hypothesis because, it's very difficult to go in and rigorously test every element of it. But the hypothesis we have is that the stimulation, what we know happens, and it's very clear, and you can feel it when you drink it, is you are stimulating the sensory neurons in your mouth and your esophagus and your stomach. And you feel that. You feel a kick from drinking it. And it's followed by kind of an afterglow, which is clearly from activating some of the receptors that mediate the sensation of heat. Those are called TRPV1 channels. So it's very clear we're getting strong stimulation of this population of sensory neurons. Those sensory neurons, there's a lot of them, and they go into multiple circuits. One of the circuits they feed into is through the vagus nerve. And from there, they stimulate areas in the brainstem and other places in the brain. And those areas, in turn, have very strong control over spinal cord circuits. And so these brainstem areas, for example, release transmitters like dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, all of which have input into the spinal cord. And so what we think is happening, and we're reasonably sure about this part, is that the ultimate effect of that change in these modulatory pathways in the spinal cord is to just tweak or damp down the excitability of the motor neurons, which are causing the cramp to begin with. And we know that in models of spasm, that the motor neurons, when they're firing excessively, when they're having these little mini seizures that are producing cramps or spasms, that activity can be turned off actually fairly easily. It doesn't take much to do it. It's almost like a little bistable circuit where it can be active, where it's firing, having the seizure, making the cramp, but you don't have to do much to damp it down and stop it. And so we think it's the activity, modulatory activity from higher up in the brain that's damping it down. The sensory neurons in the mouth and the esophagus and especially in the stomach also have direct input into the spinal cord. And so it may be also that direct input is modulating these circuits. So ultimately, the effect is to modulate the circuits controlling the motor neurons, which in turn control the muscle. And the exact details of how that's happening, we don't know. But it's actually quite amazing when you drink it. And, we also heard almost everybody, like my colleagues in science who were first talking about it, they said, they said the same thing. Well, how can this possibly be absorbed, in a minute? How can it act in a minute? And the answer is, it can't be. And so we're quite sure that it acts by the stimulation of these neurons. And when you drink it, you feel the neurons being activated. I've taken it a number of times when I'm having a very active cramp, and many times you can take it, and we've heard this from many people too. They'll have a cramp which they know will not resolve on its own from their experience. you drink it and you feel the glow from it, you feel the kick, and it's just simultaneously you feel the cramp subside. So it's very clear there's some sort of fairly direct mechanism, and we think it's through these neural circuits that then interrupt the firing of the motor neuron.
Well, all I have to say is hooray for you and Dr. McKinnon. Dr. Bean, it's so nice to have a scientific explanation for a home remedy, and we are just thrilled with your research.
Oh, it's fun talking with you about it.
Dr. Bruce Bean, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
It was a pleasure being with you.
You've been listening to Dr. Bruce Bean, the Robert Winthrop Professor of Neurobiology at Harvard Medical School. The product he's been describing, Hot Shot, is sold online at Team Hot Shot and will soon be available on Amazon. We have zero financial interest in this product ourselves.
We're talking today about wacky remedies. Do you have one that puzzles you? We can't promise to explain it. Probably we won't know how it works, but we'd love to hear about it. Have you tried soy sauce for kitchen burns? What about chocolate to stop hiccups or black pepper to stop bleeding? We welcome your calls at 888-472-3366. You can email us at radio@peoplespharmacy.com, or you can get in touch by way of Twitter. We're at People's Pharmacy. And Joe, we do have a tweet from Stacy. She says, pickle juice works incredibly quick for cramps. Husband has used mustard, yellow only.
Well, let's go to the phones. We go where, Terry? Aiken, South Carolina. Terry, welcome to the People's Pharmacy. What's your story? Are you something about a diving instructor?
Yeah, I was a scuba diving instructor for about 10 years, and one of my students had muscle cramps in both calves, and we got him on the boat. But before that had happened, I had heard about the pickle juice, so I actually carried some with me. And he took some pickle juice and said his symptoms resolved almost immediately.
And that is what we do hear from people, is that it works almost immediately, within a minute, maybe 2 minutes. And as Dr. Bean was just saying, that's not long enough for it to be acting by replenishing electrolytes.
Well, thank you very much for the call, Terry. And as you know, pickle juice contains that acetic acid, vinegar, that is affecting. Now, how do you spell those receptors, Terry? TRP, he called them TRP?
The TRP receptors, it's TRP, and there's a couple of different flavors, if I may call them that. There are some that are specifically designed to actually sense heat, and those are the TRPV1 receptors that capsaicin hits. So that's why we call hot chili peppers hot, because they're hitting the heat receptors. There are other receptors that are specially designed to sense cold. And those, I think they're TRP M2s, but I'm not absolutely certain about the M2. But anyway, menthol hits them, which is why mint is so cooling and refreshing.
Let's go to Concord, Virginia. Hi, Lori. You're on the People's Pharmacy. What's this about yellow mustard?
Hi. Excuse me. Hi, Joe and Terry. I have had cramps in my legs. It seems to happen in the middle of the night, and I have mustard by my bed in little packets, and I open up a packet, swallow the mustard, and the cramp is normally resolved really almost immediately as I swallow it, and it's just amazing. But the other night I had a cramp that involved my left baby toe and the toe next to it and the back part of my calf, and I ate the mustard, and it took a while for it to work. So I'm very interested in what Dr. Bean and his colleague have been doing, because maybe I'll need a different chemical to help me.
Maybe you will. We're not sure, Lori, but it's interesting.
Well, and the other thing that's interesting is, where the cramp occurs, because, maybe that the spinal nerves, the motor neurons may innervate the calf muscle in a somewhat different way than the little toe.
Who knows? Who knows? Joe, we've got an email from Allie. Those little mustard packets are really popular, I'll tell you. So here's what Allie says. I played soccer in college, and it was common to have cramps, obviously. We would literally carry small packets of mustard in our bags, and once we felt a cramp coming on, we'd shoot the mustard quickly. It was hilarious, but also disgusting, but hey, it worked.
Well, there you go. There are a lot of skeptics out there, and the skeptics basically say, these are home remedies, they're nonsense. So here's one. And he says, I'm disappointed in your response to the person who claimed that swallowing a teaspoonful of mustard cured severe leg cramps in 2 minutes. Explain, please, how anything that is swallowed could go through the digestive system, enter the bloodstream, reach the writer's legs, and ease cramps all in less than 2 minutes. This sounds like junk science and should be relegated to the trash bin.
Well, and if that were indeed the way it was working, it would be junk science, right? Because we've never actually studied that and proven that that is how it works. In fact, Kevin Miller, the researcher in Utah that Dr. Bean talked about, has done research specifically showing that it's not working through electrolyte rebalancing. So we knew that wasn't what happened. So great that we now have a new hypothesis.
Well, the problem is that this skeptic was thinking like a pharmacologist, like I used to think. You'd have to swallow it. It'd have to be absorbed through the stomach, get into the bloodstream, circulate, and end up in the muscle. But it doesn't do that. If we are to believe Dr. Bean and Dr. McKinnon's hypothesis, you're stimulating these neurons, and that's happening within seconds. And then those neurons are overriding the muscle cramp, and that usually takes less than 2 minutes.
Joe Shannon has sent us a message through Twitter. She says, I'm not sure, I keep mustard packets in my car for toe cramps. It works every time. Uh-huh. And toe cramps when you're driving, that can be a little risky.
Yes. Let's go to Kirk in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. Kirk, we just have a minute before the break.
How are you guys today, Joe, Terry?
We're doing well. Hope you are.
We are, or I am. And I just wanted to call in and say that, and I tell all my friends at the same time here, and I'm just listening this morning. I'm out extracting honey, listening to you guys on the radio. But so anyways, what I do is apple cider vinegar, and it really helps me. Every 30 seconds to a minute, it is gone. And I mix that a shot of apple cider vinegar with a shot or two of water, or you can take it straight. But if not, that it immediately takes care of the cramp.
Well, and there we go. Acetic acid. It's activating the TRP receptors
exactly
in your mouth, your esophagus, and in your stomach. And so we actually have a hypothesis, maybe even a plausible explanation. Thank you so much for that call. Well, we do need to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll answer your questions and stories about unusual remedies. You can join the conversation. Our lines are open. The number is 888-472-3366. You can email us, radio@peoplespharmacy.com, or reach us via Twitter. We're at People's Pharmacy. Again, the number, 888-472-3366.
You're listening to the People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you value the health information you get when you listen to the People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions, helping dry, cracked skin feel utterly soft and smooth. 800-345-7339. The website is uddercream.com.
If you'd like to purchase a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1054, or find it on the web at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today we're talking about peculiar remedies. Is there a remedy that puzzles you? If you have a question or a story about a unique remedy, you can email radio@peoplespharmacy.com or call us 888-472-3366. You can also reach us through Twitter. We're at People's Pharmacy. The number again, 888-472-3366.
Now, Terry, do you remember, I'm going to think maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we got a call from a nurse, and she said, when my kids come down with a cough, I slather the soles of their feet with Vicks Vapor Rub, and within a few minutes, the cough seems to subside and they can get to sleep. Do you remember that call?
I sure do. She said, now I'm careful about who I tell this to because I don't want anyone to think I'm crazy.
Well, she said and if I'm quoting her correctly, a wacky remedy.
She did say that. That's my recollection as well.
And, we initially were pretty skeptical. I mean, I was skeptical. As a pharmacologist, I'm thinking, okay, Vicks Vapor Rub, soles of the feet, thick skin. How could any ingredient in Vicks be absorbed through the skin, get into the bloodstream, manage to get to the cough center in the brain, deep in the brainstem, and actually exert an effect within 10 minutes or less? It made no sense.
So Vicks is actually approved by the FDA as an over-the-counter product for controlling cough, but you're supposed to smear it on your chest or whatever it is you're supposed to do.
Exactly, and everybody thought it was because you're inhaling the
fumes.
Yeah, the menthol.
You're definitely getting that aroma. It's like aromatherapy.
Yeah, well, and it's very powerful. If you've ever smelled Vicks, you know exactly that.
Menthol and camphor and a number of other things.
Right. Well, I have a new, what I'd like to think is plausible hypothesis based on Dr. Bean and his Nobel Prize-winning colleague, Dr. Rod McKinnon. Here's my hypothesis.
Okay, sweetie, I don't think you're going to get a Nobel Prize for it.
Guaranteed.
Keep going.
But I think it's the menthol, because didn't you say something about menthol affecting these trip receptors?
Absolutely. So, and menthol actually is approved as a cough suppressant.
So here you go. There are all sorts of sensory neurons in the soles of your feet, and your feet in general. In fact, acupuncture has known about this for, thousands of years. So if you put the Vicks on the soles of the feet, you are stimulating sensory neurons. Those neurons are going to the spinal cord. The spinal cord is adjacent to the cough center in the pons, in the brain. And why wouldn't it work through a neuronal mechanism to inhibit the cough reflex, just as the mustard, the pickle juice are stimulating trip receptors in the mouth, the throat, and the stomach to overwhelm the muscle cramp. So maybe Vicks is working through a completely different neuronal mechanism that's just as plausible. What do you think?
It's possible. It sounds interesting. It sounds plausible. I don't know if it's true, but it does sound plausible. And we definitely have had many, many people testify that Vicks on the soles of the feet for most coughs will stop it but it takes time, like about 10 minutes or so, maybe 15. But it does seem to work just about as well as smearing it on your chest.
Now, there is a caveat, of course.
Well, you don't want to walk around with the Vicks and smear it all over the floor or get it on your sheets, right?
Right. Nice warm socks.
Put on the socks.
Let's go to Columbia, South Carolina. Hi, Gary. You're on the People's Pharmacy. What's the story?
Yes, hi, and I appreciate this conversation. I have night cramps, severe night cramps in the calf of my leg, and it's always in the calf of my right leg, never the left. And I didn't know of any remedy, so what I would do is stand on my toe until it would go away. And the horrible pain was really bad until I started to research a little bit, and I found the pickle remedy. So then I would eat a pickle every night, and that seemed to help to alleviate the cramps. And I appreciate learning about these other types of remedies as well. My question is this something that comes on seasonal, or is it something that might be triggered by life interactions like stress or other things? Because I haven't had a pickle in over a month, and I haven't had a leg cramp in over a month. But when it does start to occur, then I start eating the pickles again.
Good question, Gary. No answer from here. Your idea that it has something to do with what's going on in your life is very plausible. And, of course, there are people who report to us that when they take magnesium supplements, they don't get cramps. If they don't take their magnesium supplements, they do get cramps. I'm actually one of those people. I find that magnesium is very helpful at preventing cramps. There are probably lots of other things. And the idea that you might get muscle cramps because you are dehydrated is certainly possible. There may be several different ways to produce muscle cramps, and dehydration or electrolyte imbalance could be one of them. It just might not be the primary one for athletes like Dr. Bean and Dr. McKinnon.
Well, again, my hypothesis is that when you're an elite athlete and you're riding a bicycle for 110 miles, at some point you're overstimulating the nerve as well as the muscle.
Sure, absolutely.
And that cramp may, in fact, be as a result.
Now, Joe, here is a wacky remedy from Susan. And this is one we've heard before. I've never figured out how to make it work, and as a result, I'm skeptical. But here it is, and lots of people like this one. If you have a muscle cramp, squeeze the grooved area of your upper lip, it's called the frenum, between your thumb and forefinger, and really pinch it hard. And the leg cramp will release in about a minute.
We have heard this repeatedly.
We have.
And, again, it was one of those, how does that work?
I have to believe that there is a way that it works, although, as I say, I have actually tried it and not been successful, so my technique is not good.
Well, again, the skeptics would go, nah, impossible. But again, if we go back to Dr. Bean and Dr. McKinnon, it might very well be that it's working through stimulating those sensory neurons, and they're activating trip receptors, and then they're ending up releasing that cramp. Well, it's a plausible hypothesis, in my opinion. We go to Roanoke, Virginia. Caroline, welcome to the People's Pharmacy. You've tried this soap, we understand.
Yes, I have. And I heard it on your show many years ago, and I thought, well, what the heck? I'll try it. And I tell you what, my restless leg syndrome is gone. And if I think it's coming back, I just put a new cake of soap in the bed. I think, well, the other one's lost its mojo or whatever it's doing. But what I wanted to address was about the leg cramps. And my brother that lives in Louisiana, he told me one day, he says, I think you're lacking in magnesium. And sure enough, as soon as I started taking magnesium citrate, and I really am so much better. And I know your show is all about cures, about, what you can do, but I wonder what caused my body to be lacking in magnesium. It could be diet, could be my age, but I just want to tell your fans out there that magnesium citrate is evidently very, very important for all your muscles in your body, including your heart. So it has cut my leg cramps down 90% since I started taking 2 tablets a day.
Carolyn, we are so glad to hear that. It's true. Magnesium is actually absolutely crucial for your muscles. It's also crucial for the nerves.
Indeed it is.
So it may be operating at both levels, and there are so many ways for people to get low in magnesium. Americans in general tend to be a little lower in magnesium than they should be, largely because, especially if we're eating a diet that's high in processed foods, because if we're really loading up on the nuts and the beans and the legumes, the lentils and peas and all that stuff, and we're eating lots and lots of green leafy vegetables and generally following one of those DASH diets or a Mediterranean diet, then we're getting plenty of magnesium. But if we're taking drugs, Joe, that could undo it.
If we're taking drugs, that can definitely undo it. And tens of millions of Americans take diuretics for their high blood pressure. In fact, they may not even realize that the pill they're taking has a diuretic, a water pill in it. And that will flush not only sodium, but also magnesium out of the system. So you could have low levels of magnesium. And then there are the proton pump inhibitors, the acid suppressors like Prilosec, Prevacid, Nexium. They also can cause something called hypomagnesemia, too little magnesium. And when your magnesium levels drop, it affects your muscles. So good call. Thank you very much for sharing.
Yes, and we now go to Wilmington, North Carolina. Joanne, welcome to the People's Pharmacy. Tell us your story, please.
Okay, I have tried turmeric in various pills and powders. I even tried the one that said black pepper extract, and I have terrible arthritis, and I thought it would just be wonderful. But every time I try it, I spend half the day on the john because it gives me diarrhea. Is there anything I can take that I would love to take the turmeric, but I don't want to spend the day just going to the bathroom?
Oh, no, you don't. That can be a reaction that some people have, and I'm not sure that we've got a way around it for you, Joanne. You may just need to look for a different solution for your arthritis pain.
Yeah, we, in India, they don't take pills. Americans love our pills and our capsules. And so in India, they just have curry. I mean, they eat it with their food,
but they eat curry every day. So that Joanne's probably not going to eat curry every day.
No, but the concentrated form may just not agree with her, and some people develop a rash.
Yeah, not everyone can handle curcumin, which is what you usually find in those pills. It's concentrated. It's the active ingredient, and for some people, it does have anti-inflammatory activity. For some people, it's very helpful for the arthritis, but other people can't take it. So let's think of another remedy.
Well, there's tart cherry juice, which has anti-inflammatory activity and inhibits COX-2, the enzyme that Celebrex works on. There's, of course, our infamous gin-soaked raisins that involve, yellow golden raisins and gin with juniper, and you eat 9 a day. And then there's Certo, C-E-R-T-O, and grape juice. The Certo, of course, is plant pectin. It's the stuff that thickens jams and jellies.
So all of these are implausible arthritis remedies, Joanne, but we hear from many people that they help, and you'll just have to try and see which one will be able to help you.
Good luck, and let us know if anything does indeed work.
And Joe, speaking of juniper berries, which is, of course, the flavoring in gin, I found a recent research from China published in Pharmacognosy magazine. They induced rheumatoid arthritis in rats, and then they gave them flavonoids from juniper, and really, really calmed the inflammation and the arthritis.
Cool. Sherry in Madison, Wisconsin, you're on the People's Pharmacy. We're just about out of time. What's your story?
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to tell you that I sleep with a bar of soap ever since hearing your story. It works great, except sometimes I do wake up with a cramp, and I think, well, maybe the bar of soap's out of juice or whatever. So I go in the bathroom, and I'll rub a fresh bar of soap on my cramp. And it generally works, but my aunt told me about apple cider vinegar, and it works instantly. I mean, it's kind of hard to take straight, but you just take about a tablespoon, and it goes away instantly.
Oh, that's so good to hear. And that is consistent with the hypothesis we've been talking about, and consistent with what we've heard from other folks.
Well, Terry, I have a plausible explanation for why soap will work. And so many, again, health professionals are skeptics. No, couldn't work. It's all a placebo. Well, we have receptors in our skin.
Right.
Smell receptors.
Correct. Olfactory receptors in the skin. What are they doing there? Because you don't smell with your skin, but you actually do.
And it turns out that one of the ingredients in soap, limonene, which is a fragrance that is found in like dozens of soaps, and the one that that people say often works best is like Irish Spring or Ivory. Maybe the fragrance is stimulating those olfactory receptors in the skin, and it's working through the spinal cord to prevent the cramps. It doesn't work very well unless you actually hold it in your hand. Some people say it works for hand cramps or rub it on your skin. So who knows? There's a plausible explanation. We go to Fort Worth, Texas. David, we are running up against the clock. What's the story?
Howdy. I had acid reflux really for years, and I just decided to try some mustard, and I quit having acid reflux, even if I quit using the mustard after a few weeks. And it alleviated my knee cramp. Knee pain that I had for years from, I believe, chondromalacia, maybe if I'm wrong. But no knee cramps, no ankle arthritis, and no acid reflux. And I tell everybody about it.
Oh, David, that's really cool. Thanks so much for sharing it with us.
Now, I have to tell you, David, we do not have an explanation for why mustard would work against reflux. It just, it doesn't make any sense to me at a pharmacological level. On the other hand, Terry, we have heard from so many people who tell us a little yellow mustard takes away their indigestion, or even, believe it or not, a little apple cider vinegar. So maybe there's an explanation, and we just don't know what it is.
I'm sure there's an explanation. I just don't know what it is. And, Joe, we have an email from Julie in Front Royal, Virginia. She says, my husband and I have had great luck keeping a bottle of magnesium gel next to the bed. When a leg cramp starts, they rub a little of this magnesium gel on the muscle that's cramping, and it goes away instantly.
Well, here is a call. We don't have time to take Andy in Raleigh, North Carolina, but he says when he gets a leg cramp, he drinks tonic water because it has quinine in it. And for years, people actually bought quinine over the counter. Now the FDA has banned that. But maybe it's the strong flavor of quinine. It's very bitter.
It is very bitter, and we actually don't know how the quinine works, but we have heard from many people that it does.
Maybe it's stimulating those TRP receptors.
Maybe it is.
Well, you just heard some very interesting explanations about how home remedies work. Maybe the skeptics will change their tune. That's all.
I don't believe that.
That's all the time we have. We want to thank our guest today, Dr. Bruce Bean, professor of neurobiology at Harvard Medical School.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Sophie Copeland provided technical assistance. Al Wadarski is the engineer. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Extra Care 20 Cream with 20% urea for extra skin protection. The website, uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a copy of today's show, you can purchase it at 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1054. That number again, 800-732-2334, or find it at our website, peoplespharmacy.com.
And when you go to the site, you can learn more about herbs and home remedies. You can find links to the articles we talked about and our book, People's Pharmacy, Quick and Handy Home Remedies. Please subscribe to our newsletter. Well, in Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Please join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to The People's Pharmacy.
When a shopper places an order, you have one shot at winning them as a lifelong customer. I'm Al Coe, CEO of ShipStation. I'm obsessed with ShipStation being the most reliable and efficient way you can ship. At ShipStation, our promise is to make shipping easier for e-commerce business owners. We're focused on providing the most integrations with all the places you sell and automating manual tasks to make fulfillment easier for your team. We partner with all the major carriers to make sure you get the lowest possible rates because every dollar counts. So no matter what you're sending or where you're shipping to, ShipStation can get it there fast and keep your customers happy. See for yourself how ShipStation can reduce the time and effort you spend on order fulfillment. Go to ShipStation.com to sign up for your free trial. That's ShipStation.com.